So in the last video, I trimmed back to the water line, which may show up in here. It's this line right here. And then I filled up from there up to the chine. So the petrol play has a chine, and the chine is basically where the side of the boat transitions to the bottom of the boat. And in this case, it's got a hard chine at the back, behind the cockpit area. So the side of the boat here and the bottom of the boat meet at a hard angle. At the bow of the boat, up in here, it softens out, so it's more rounded. But back here, it's a hard angle. And that's a little bit tricky to strip around. If you were trying to get a strip from here, the side of the boat, to here, you'd see it would be on the bottom of the boat, and so it's a lot of twist right there. It might not be impossible to do, but it's a lot of work. So what I like to do is strip up just a little bit past that chine, then trim back to the chine, and then reset and start again. So I'll have a full length strip running right along that chine on the bottom of the boat, and these strips here get trimmed back. You can see I've already done it on this side, and I'm going to do it on the side closest to me now. And so I've set up a couple marks in order to help with that process. There's a little bit hard to see on the video, so let's zoom in a little bit here. So the first line I have is a diagonal line. I'll just run a pencil up through it. So you see that line. I have that marked on all the forms. So there's another one here. Another one here. So that's consistent on all the forms. And that is essentially a plane cutting down through the boat at a consistent angle on the whole length of the boat. It's kind of like the water line. So the water line is right down in here. Let's see, you can see that right there. Just let's see, zoom out. So on this one here, you can see the water lines right there. So that water line is a horizontal plane cutting through the boat straight across all full length. This diagonal is a diagonal, essentially like a water line, but it's cutting through the whole boat in a plane. So if I look at this in the right angle, basically get my eye down onto it so it's right, my eye's right on that line, that would be a perfectly straight line all the way down the length of the boat. So that gives me a consistent place to cut to the full length of the boat. They'll look nice and fair because it's a nice straight in one plane and curve, following the curve of the boat. I set that up so that diagonal hits the corner here right at the chine. But up at the bow of the boat, it's rounded and I don't have that hard angle. So, but I want to have a nice continuous line that I can use as a reference when I trim back. So the other line I have on here, it's a shorter little tick mark right in here. Right there. And so that is a bisection of the angle between the bottom and the side. So you have strips coming in from both directions here, like that. So this one comes in this way, this one comes in this way. If I were to cut a nice, it's sort of like a miter on a picture frame, is splitting that angle so this, the top edge of this surface and the top edge of this surface meet right out at a corner. And so I'm this little marks the angle to go from the corner of the form out to the outside corner of the surface of the boat. And I've set up this diagonal so it also hits the surface at the same spot. So if I cut to that diagonal and then bevel to this little tick mark, I will get a nice bisection on the hard chine. I don't bother with the tick mark up here where it's rounded. So I don't bother with it up farther to the front of the boat where the forms become more rounded. I only have that tick mark where it's a hard chine. So I'm going to end up beveling to that tick mark, and then when I get to the rounded area, I'll just use my robo bevel and make a nice angle perpendicular to the surface of the boat. And they should sort of converge with each other. So the process of marking this is the same as we did for the waterline. So I have my little gauge here. Again, this line here is a straight line with that line right there. So if I line this up with the diagonal, this point will point to the outside point where that diagonal hits the surface of the boat. So setting it up right on that diagonal and then marking where it hits the outside surface. Do that the whole length. Mark all those diagonals. And then just like the water line, I'll string a spline or a batten to connect those dots, ferret out, mark it, cut, and plane. We'll come back when we get to the planing portion so I can go into a little bit more detail about how we establish that bevel there. When I was adding strips here, I wanted to make sure I went completely beyond this line that I'm cutting now, so that way I wouldn't end up trying to bevel a cove section, and you know, I don't want any gaps there. So I went past where I thought I needed to be on each strip just to be sure I had enough strips there. So after trimming it with the saw, it's the same process as I did on the waterline, where I knock off the high spots. But you'll see the line here. Here's one of the little tick marks I made with the tool to transfer the diagonal from the inside of the form to the outside of the skin. I tried to do my best to hit those lines with this pencil mark, but now this pencil mark was just a guide for the saw work. At this point, what I'm trying to do is make this edge straight, fair, and smooth. So again, we're going to look for the high spots and knock those down. So you want to get your eye right down along the line, eyeball down it as much as you can, and then start looking for the high spots. So like right in here, you see it bumps up a little bit. So we're just going to knock that down. As I said last time, if this spot is lower than this spot, how many times can we pass the plane over here to get this down to that height? Right, it doesn't make sense. There's no point in running the plane over a low spot and making it deeper until we get the high spot taken care of. So I'm going to use my Edge Rabbit plane, Stanley number 79, and I'm going to just look for that high spot and start shaving it back. So you see I start with a short stroke because I'm taking off just the top bit. Then my strokes get longer and longer as I make a flatter spot on there. When it looks pretty good, stop. And look for the next one. So there's a little high spot right there. So the first order of business is just making this edge, this freshly cut edge, nice and straight. And we're not worried about meeting this line. That line's just a guide. Initially, we just want to make it straight. We will later decide where we actually want that line to be. But right now, we're just straightening it out. Depending on how particular you are, this is a time you might want to check and see that this edge, the two edges on either side match each other. So measuring from the center line down to one edge, down to the other edge. The reason you might feel this matters is because as we're stripping up from here to the keel line, this is going to determine how the strips converge at the keel line. So here, this edge is a little bit lower cut than this edge. So again, if I'm going to strip up here and keep on adding strips, in order to have them converge on the center line at the same time, I need to have this edge at the same place, same distance from the keel line. In order to take care of that, I would just keep on planing this down. Once I establish that this is nice and straight, then I can start to move that line. But at this point, I'm just going to continue working on straightening it out, looking for high spots. Once I've established this line where I think it looks pretty good, it's time to twofold is to work on the bevel. So I have these bevel marks here, which you may or may not see them on the video. They're right in here. So I want to now make this edge here follow that bevel. As I'm using my side bevel plane here, I'm going to run it down this edge looking at those little tick marks I've made and doing my best to have this plane follow that bevel. So I'm trying to get the face of this plane parallel to that bevel. So I'm trying to create a bevel here that kind of matches that tick mark. You know, it's not going to be perfect, but we can make it pretty good. So what happens with that is then when we come in with this strip, the first strip on the bottom, it comes out and will hopefully meet that edge. But how do we make sure that happens? The goal here is for these lines to converge on the outer edge of the surface of the boat. And this bevel is supposed to mark from the corner on the inside out to the corner on the outside. So in order for that to work out, we actually have to get this bottom edge so it's on that corner. So that might mean we need to move this edge down a little bit. So it's ends up right on that corner. So we continue planing this. Each time we take a stroke with this plane, it's removing a little bit of wood and moving that line downwards. And we look and see how it's doing relative to that little corner there. Keep eyeballing down the edge just to make sure nothing funny is happening. So again, we're only doing this where the chine is hard, so where there's a sharp angle between the bottom of the boat and the side of the boat. So once we get this chine area sorted out, we want to think about this area where there is no chine. So on the bow end of the boat, this is all much softer here. Back here is where the hard chine is. Up here it all softens right out and it's much more rounded. So that sort of stuff we're comfortable with the robo bevel. We're trying to make the strip here, the edge here square to the form beyond it, so when we put a square edge strip down, it fits without any adjustment. So we'll take the robo bevel and work down this edge and true up the edge for the robo bevel. So again, the robo bevel has this little shoulder plane in it. And if we were to lay the shoulder plane flat against the form here, that would make this edge, and plane away here, that would make this edge here square to the form right there. And so the robo bevel is just a tool to hold the little shoulder plane and hold it flat against the forms while we're going down the water. And if we hold the robo bevel flat against the forms, as we make our way down, it's going to tend to roll as we go, and keep that edge, plane that edge to get it nice and square. And there is a transition area here between where the chine ends and where the hard chine ends and it softens, that it's going to sort of blend together. And you can do that either with the robo bevel or with the side rabbet plane, and just sort of blend that together. Then when we go to put the strip on, we'll start with the square edge strip along here and fit it where it fits. There's going to be places here where we use the robo bevel, which should drop right in place nice and tight. But then we'll have to fit it up here where the chine is harder. So all this work I've been doing where I overstrip, trim back, then overstrip again and trim back to get the water line and then the chine line. It's a lot of work. Each one probably adds, several hours to the process, the whole building process. And the only reason I'm doing it is for aesthetic purposes. I just like the look of having a break in the colors. So here it's a little bit darker, here it's a little bit lighter, and then have that accent. And as a kayak designer, I like to have the water line in there as a reference. So when I'm going out and sea trials, I see, okay, is it floating on its lines? And if I move my weight forward and back, how does that affect how it's floating and how it performs, etc. So, I kind of like having the water line on there, and it serves a practical purpose for me, but really it doesn't make the boat any better. I stripped up here, then cut the water line, and then started stripping again until I was past the chine, then trimmed that off. The chine, it's here, I need to get around it, and if I followed these strips up here, they would have had a lot of twist to get around. So, what could I do to avoid all of that, just to make the whole process of stripping easier? Well, on some of my plans, on my petrol plans, I actually included diagonal at the shear line and at the water line, and they're parallel. The first strip I put in here was the shear strip, and that follows the shear, so it's one strip coming all the way down here, all the way to the point. But the second strip was this strip, and right about here springs away from that shear strip and keeps on going and ends up here someplace, and so I have these cheater strips in there. But let's say I took advantage of that and planned how much that second strip sprung away. And let's say I figured out where I wanted the chine strip to land and then measured down from there. So I have this distance here in the middle of the boat that's sort of consistent for a while there, for quite a few forms. Here it starts to spring away. And so, let's say out at the bow of the boat, I had the second strip go down to there. So this would be the bottom edge of the second strip. So if I set up that second strip, so it followed that line, something like that. So I'll bring it all the way out to here. So at that point where I let the strips naturally follow their curve, if I'd done it like this, so this was the second strip and then stripped up from there, by the time I get to the chine here, the length of the strip is hitting the chine all at once. So in order to get over the chine, maybe I throw in some narrow accent strips, or if I'm really lucky, I just add the next strip and it all falls onto the bottom of the boat. So stripping up from here, keep on stripping up until you get to the chine, and then it, in one strip, transitions the whole length of the boat to the bottom, and then you keep on stripping. And so what you need to do there is you had none of these overstripping, trim back, overstrip, trim back operations. What you would have is a larger cheater strip area here. Not, other than the first strip, that's actually pretty easy to strip up. It takes a little while, but it's probably quicker than doing these overstrip, trim, overstrip, trim. So just something to think about as you're laying out your stripping pattern. And if you're trying to make it easy, that's probably easier than what I'm doing here. Again, what I'm doing here is purely for aesthetic reasons. If I wanted this same sort of idea where it was dark on the sides and light on the bottom, I could make that transition right at the chine. Throw a couple accent strips right there to make that transition past the chine, then strip on from there and never have to do any of this trimming stuff. So just something to think about. Fitting this first bottom strip in. And at this hard chine, we've got a fairly open gap here. So there's an open gap here. And this is the old process of seeing what the gap is there, matching the gap with my plane, and then planing away. And that's pretty tight there. Still open down form number 12. So I've numbered the forms here and numbered on the strips just so I can quickly see where that strip crosses that form. So you notice as I'm holding this, I'm pressing down on it to get a little bit of curvature this way. That way when I go to apply pressure with the plane, it doesn't just flex away from the blade and not cut. So I'm using that flex to apply a little bit of pressure.